The Nuts and Bolts of Writing, Season 2, a podcast where we talk about literature, the ins and outs of writing, and how to actually start writing.
Hey everybody, this is your girl Tete again, one of the co-hosts of the Nuts and Bolts of Writing. And today we are resuming our mini-series on the Bioshock franchise. To be frank, we are Bioshocked, my friends. So while Bioshock remains beloved by its fans, I got to admit, when it came to Fortunus Games and I playing this particular game, it didn't quite meet our expectations as Bioshock Infinite did. Maybe it was the lack of open world. Maybe it was the fact that the environments were so repetitive. Or perhaps it just didn't quite hit all the emotional and, if you will, psychological highs and lows that Bioshock Infinite did. However, without further ado, we'll delve right in. More than once, Bioshock 1 felt repetitive. The environments, while imaginative in the first 20 minutes, began to morph in an endless loop of same old, once we were in an hour in the game. Bioshock 1 also lacked pretty much any sympathetic characters we could really interact with, nor could we fully understand the personalities and motivations of the characters we did encounter, such as Dr. Tenenbaum. And also, too, while we're at it, in our last two episodes, we had talked about Bioshock Infinite, and we're also going to be talking about, we're going to touch on Burial at Sea Part 2 as well. And I think also we should probably discuss what makes Bioshock 1 particularly beloved by fans, but why it didn't necessarily hit a note with us. So without further ado, again, I welcome the marvelously talented, absolutely fantastic Fortunus Games as we delve further into Bioshock 1.
Hi! Yeah, unfortunately, Bioshock had many problems when it came to portraying certain racial and ethnic groups. Here's what we both noticed when playing the games and watching others' gameplay videos. Number one, many fans will argue that the racist depictions, such as the Rapture vending machines like El Bandito, are products of their time. The disturbing caricatures featured heavily in Columbia propaganda are also attributed to real-life media depictions throughout American art and entertainment. However, how can we explain the stereotypes of characters such as Grace Holloway in Bioshock 2?
An excellent question. So, upon seeing Grace, like as soon as you are introduced to Grace and you hear her, like the moment she steps into her second sentence, you can definitely see that unfortunately she is a glaring product of white saviorism. For example, Sophia Lamb claims to have helped Grace when the jazz singer was blacklisted by Ryan. But when we notice Grace talking about Eleanor, we noticed that Lamb had pretty much turned Grace into an unflattering stereotype. She turned Grace into the mammy, because Grace is basically the mammy, the nanny, if you will, to Eleanor, and that is such a glaring regressive stereotype.
It is, because also another thing is that even though Grace is extremely talented at music, we don't really get to see much of that other than in recordings about that, you know? And, when Grace actually talks, most of the time she's talking about how much she misses Eleanor.
Right. We don't hear her, voicing her political opinions. We don't, we don't see any aspect of her personality except that she just feels like a very stereotypical mammy. I mean, almost like the mammies in something like Gone for the Wind, Gone with the Wind.
Right, exactly. And she also has not a lot of agency, because even though she is, I think, guarding that part of the Bioshock 2 game, that she's sending all the people after us. I forgot that part of the game's name, but yeah, she's in charge of that area because she's sending the splicers after us. Do you feel like she has actually any power, or does it just feel like a game mechanic?
It feels like a game mechanic. It's also a false it's a false facade of power that Lamb has given her. Like Lamb is like, I'll leave you in charge of this area, but as long as you only run it the way I say to do it. So in that case, does Grace have really any kind of agency, or is she just a pawn of Lamb's?
Right. Second question. Why is Charles Milton Porter from the Minerva Den DLC in Bioshock 2 racist to you? Most people do not think he is racist and think he is very progressive and one of their favorite characters.
On one hand, on the surface, Charles Milton Porter seems very progressive. I mean, very, pretty astute, but here's where it deviates. So to put it like this, some claim the successes of a character like Charles Milton Porter combat racial stereotypes. They do in a way. Sure, Dr. Porter is a highly accomplished mathematician and genius. He's even working with greats like Alan Turing. But it's Dr. Porter's fate being turned into a big daddy. It evokes, in the words of Sinclair, and this is, Sinclair's exact word, slavery. And that in itself, it feels like sort of a tragic regressive story, like, I don't know, 12 years a slave, which not necessarily regressive, but it's yet again kind of falling into an expected pattern. And and with figures like Holloway and Porter, they definitely fit into the tragic person of color trope, and that was made fashionable in a lot of modern cinema. There's even other characters who fit into this, such as Chen Lin. Despite the time manipulating tears that you can choose an infinite, I mean, Lin still meets a tragic end no matter what. Um, but I will say that Porter, unfortunately, Dr. Porter fits that. I mean, yes, he does have all these great things, but when you turn him into a big daddy, you've just basically made him into, in the most unethical way, a slave. And
Right.
it's
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
uh,
is, yeah, but
yeah.
he is one of the few people who get to Big Daddy himself with the help of Tenenbaum. How do you feel about that?
Oh my. It feels very white savior-esque. I mean, I know that Tenenbaum does not fit the Wasp, but she still is not. You know what I mean? If this had been done by, say, another scientist or doctor who would have been, an individual of the same race and ethnicity, that would have felt like some solidarity, perhaps, or just less problematic. But because it's Tenenbaum, it definitely feels like white savior. I guess maybe the only element that saves it a little bit is that Tenenbaum is a female. But still, that does feel even more white savior to a degree. Like, it doesn't matter the gender as long as it's, whatever. It feels like
Mm.
that. It feels very problematic to me. And it doesn't look like that on the surface, but when you kind of glance at it from a second time or a deeper perspective, it feels like that. What do you think?
I agree because unfortunately BioShock's black characters have, a lot of problems. And the other black character I wanted to talk to you about is BioShock Infinite's Daisy Fitzroy. Do you feel like she fits into some of these stereotypes or another black stereotype that's harmful?
I do, now that we're talking about it, Daisy, on one hand, is wonderfully progressive. She could have had wonderful opportunity to be fleshed out brilliantly. She was very striking, very charismatic. Like, if Daisy was leading a political movement and I was somehow in this area, I would totally throw my hat in the ring for Daisy. Daisy has my vote. But Daisy does fit into some stereotypes now that I think about it, such as, the aggressive woman of color, or the aggressive, woman of color that does not need a man, or is, aggressive, you know kind of tough and hardened, very kind of masculine in a way. And that fits into some very negative stereotypes that are more subtle, but as many in recent years have pointed out, are very damaging to the concept and the reality of Black femininity.
I totally agree. And what did you think of the retcon in Bioshock Infinite Burial at Sea, where Elizabeth, when she is sneaking throughout the vents, she sees the Lutesses talk to Daisy, and it turns out that Daisy was kind of encouraged to sacrifice herself. She was never actually going to kill the little boy. And she actually just wanted to make it look like she was going to kill the little boy so Elizabeth would kill her, and that would put an end to Comstock. So she was willing to die for that. But it just felt like another black or non-white character being sacrificed for the plot, and also to further to make a white character grow up, because the Lutesses were saying that it was a way for Elizabeth to grow up and take on responsibility by killing someone. And it had to be Daisy.
On one hand, I love that it showed a very, selfless side to Daisy. But at the same time, Daisy is yet another person of color being sacrificed for the white man's tragedy. And it felt wrong on so many levels. It felt outrageous. Why would Elizabeth have to grow up like this? Why couldn't clear communication and mentoring overtake that, rather than, say, a triggering canon event, wink, wink, reference to another movie about canon events. I'll talk about that in the next episode. Be quiet, Miguel. So that in itself, like, if Daisy could have just approached Elizabeth, hey, I know your dad sucks, I hate your dad too, I'll mentor you so you can take him down. And then that would have been a very interesting thing. And I think, along with, Booker and Daisy, I mean, Elizabeth would have been set on the perfect path. You know what I mean? Like, just good people guiding her. Well, I mean, Booker's not good, but his intentions are okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it would be fun too. Like, 3 people going against Comstock. And it would be interesting if it was like a JRPG where you can control 3 people or switch between party members.
That would have been a wonderful potential that was missed, rather than trying to milk out tragedy and edginess. I love it when in a story you can get allies. I love that because it reflects on reality. I think we as people, we want to help one another out. When we can overcome a lot of things like biases or prejudices or fear or whatever you want to slap the label on whatever's hindering us. I love to see when people become allies, because it's a reflection on the goodness of humanity. And I think we need to see more of that, rather than trying to say, oh, we're selfish and cynical and edgy, and this is how the world works. It does not, if you don't have to make it that way,
Right. I totally agree. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also I just realized that Daisy kind of contrasts with Charles Milton Porter. So Daisy is a black woman who is very masculine and very aggressive, especially when she kills Fink, and then she has the bloody palm, thingy, and then she puts it on her face.
Oh God.
Yeah,
So
you hated
problematic.
that one because it
I
was like
hated
really, it was like savagery, like highlighting how quote unquote savage she is.
I hated that, because that sounded like some sort of terrible stereotypical depiction from, I don't know, racist colonial stuff, like, oh, the tribes in this random area, they've done this, like, I don't know, stupid British colonizers or something.
Yeah, exactly, right. And Charles Milton Porter, in a way, he's a little bit like, he's not non-masculine, but because he's a victim, he's like kind of demasculinized. What do you think?
I just like this too, because and I was reading more, I was studying this a bit more. Several wonderful YouTubers, very great Black YouTubers, who have been really talking about, you know, masculinity for Black people. And they were talking about how, when the man is victimized and denied agency, it's really feeding into a white colonialist mindset of having dominion over people. And sometimes
Hmm.
that could even be maybe making them more effeminate too. Like, sort of, for example, one of the damaging stereotypes, for example, in the quote unquote minstrel, was to make the character kind of effeminate.
Exactly, because one of the fears that white Anglo-American slave owners had was that, white women would find black men attractive and sleep with them. So they had to use all these stereotypes to dissuade that from happening.
Exactly. So this is a very damning stereotype, and on the way that's handled, it's just tone deaf on so many levels, and I'm surprised this got green lighted in the time that it was released. Like, but at the same time, nothing really shocks me anymore, seeing the kind of crazy train wrecks that happen in media of all types.
Right. Okay, next question. Why do you think such a wildly outrageous and offensive racial caricature of yellow peril, such as
Shit.
Dr. Suchong, would be greenlighted in a work that came out in 2007, which is the original Bioshock? Even Burial at Sea, released in 2013, repeated this offensive depiction. What does this say about the franchise's treatment of characters who are Eastern Asian? And this also includes, Bioshock
Mm.
Infinite's Chen Lin, who we talked about previously a little bit.
Oh God, oh my, do we've just let a tiger out of the bag. And oh my gosh, well that sounded wrong for me to say tiger. See, this racism is already trying to come out,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, but it's so like it's so problem it is outrageous. Like, how could this get green lighted? It was so outrageous. Number one, the name is not right. I mean, that is not I don't even think this is a name that makes sense in any language,
It's not. Yeah, exactly. It's totally how hard is it to do research like in 2007? Like I don't know how
Jeez.
he came up with this. It's so stupid. And
Like,
and don't forget his accents too. Like it just randomly fades in and fades out. Like in Burial at Sea, when he talks to Elizabeth, it's really, really bad and broken English, but somehow in other scenes, such as I forgot which one. I think it was one of the recordings or
oh,
something.
no,
He
no,
sounded
no.
normal.
He did sound normal. Why did he have to say things like pretty lady? Like, oh my God, what propaganda from 1944 was Ken reading? Like the very bad
Mhm.
Japanese stereotype. Also, just to like put some points down there. Okay, not only does the name not make any sense, but um also Suchong does not appear in any semblance to be Korean at all. Not in name, not in form, not in mannerism or whatever. And definitely not in accent. That accent is ridiculous. I've never heard anybody with this accent unless you're like a white cast actor doing something bad like Breakfast at Tiffany's. Also too, like,
Pearl S. Buck's movie. Well, the
or
movie that was made from her book. Yeah.
exactly, like, just random white people playing Asian characters, which is oh God, I could go all day about how problematic this is.
I
But but
know.
but also he looks so, as somebody who has studied a lot of things from the different world wars, I'm more of a World War One person than I'm a World War Two person, because World War Two is just so saturated.
Mhm.
Um, Suchong looks exactly like propaganda about Japanese individuals. It
Yeah,
really does. The
exactly.
glasses, the unflattering face, if you will. And I mean, the glasses really hit home. Like, nobody's, not everyone is wearing glasses like this. I mean, you would think that a man who needs glasses would have more frames to select from than those singular glasses. And he, and I've seen plenty of problematic propaganda, like, whether that's from nationalistic propaganda or, sadly, in a lot of old era comics and animation.
Oh,
Sadly.
absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Chen Lin, his game was from 2013. Like it's not as obvious because you don't see his face, but then when you see him being tortured and you look at his hand and compare it to Elizabeth and Booker's, it's strangely yellow, isn't it? It's almost like he has
Mm.
jaundice. So it makes you wonder what is going on here. But I guess in Burial at Sea, from what a tiny bit you see of Suchong's model, his skin tone looks normal. Fortunately.
That I guess that is Suchong's saving grace, that he does have normal skin tone. Why Chen Lin has this, I cannot understand. Also his, like, the, I guess if you will, the Chinese version of his wife in that other dimension reality.
Oh yeah.
She fits in such a bad stereotype, like sort of like meek little dutiful wife, and she's like bobbing and, saying honorable husband or something,
I know. It's like straight out of Amy Tan's book. Like what is it called? Joy
Oh,
Luck Club.
Joy Luck Club, or even worse, some more racist films to delve into, like Charlie Chan, Detective.
Oh yes. And he had glasses, right?
He had glasses too, and he was such a bad stereotype. He's also like fat and has a little mustache, and the eyes and everything,
Mhm.
everything.
Yes, he was. Yeah, I did read about him because there were these YouTubers talking about, Asian depictions in America, and there were a lot of problematic stuff in the early 20th century, especially, around World War II. And,
There
this is
was.
how Japanese Americans got interned because they were seen as non-Americans, even though some of them were born there. Some of them were third generation, but oh no, they don't look like white Americans, so we got to put them away. And then they also had the paranoia about people with German names and Italian names and just this overall xenophobic nonsense.
Yeah, exactly, and then also too, like, not only in the internment camps, from what I also gathered, they were also like attacking, like other Eastern Asian communities as well.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that was very unfortunate. And of course, Dr. Suchong has to be a bad guy. I think that definitely adds to the racism. Like, if he was a good guy, it would still be bad. But because he's a bad guy and he's evil and he does science experiments to torture people and he's perverted, calling Elizabeth pretty lady, right? And,
He also said some others, like his voice got too suggestive, like,
oh, I
"Man,
know. So
terror."
gross. Yeah. But yeah, he was definitely crazy. And it's good that we only saw his model at the very end. And also he has a tragic death with the Big Daddy impaling him. So
Exactly,
yeah.
so I'm like, I guess that was that was, I guess, a positive no, I don't know, positive with a question mark, you know? Oh
Right.
my
Last
god.
but not least, there's another group that,
Mhm.
we previously talked about in some of our streams who did not get good treatment in Bioshock. So, dealing with a more evasive topic that I could not really find anyone talking about online, characters such as Tenenbaum and Dr. Steinman appear borderline anti Semitic, as well as your least favorite character, Sandra Cohen. Yet the franchise's creator, Ken Levine, reportedly draws from his Jewish American upbringing. Would these depictions of stereotypes be seen as inverted through self critique or viewed upon closer inspection as internalized racism?
You know what? Ken has either played himself so brilliantly, or he's played himself very not so brilliantly, and I say it like this, he claimed, so Levine claims to draw from his Jewish American upbringing. While it's okay to critique your community, when you're dealing it through a certain time era or through a certain context, it becomes problematic. Now, if he was wanting to set characters like in the 19, I don't know, 70s or 80s, and they're in a city and he's critiquing the community, then it's okay to do that. But if you're doing this right on the heels after World War II and you're dealing it through the weirdness of the 60s, dealing with like the Israeli state, god damn it, Ken, this is very, very problematic. I mean, that's like trying to say, like, for example, like John Adams' opera The Death of Klinghoffer is anti-Semitic, because it kind of is. I'm sorry, John Adams, but it is. As good as John Adams operas usually are. Like Dr. Atomic's a goddamn masterpiece, but Klinghoffer's an anti-Semitic train wreck. um uh Ken, it's one thing, what, it's all right to criticize or parody or make fun of. We've seen different Jewish American creators do this, like Mel Brooks has done it. um
Curb Your
I want
Enthusiasm.
Curb Your Enthusiasm. Larry David's done a really nice job of doing that. I wanted to say Woody Allen, but Woody Allen is very
Oh,
problematic
no, no,
because
don't
of
talk
his
about him.
problem. We're not going to talk about Woody Allen.
Yeah.
um but good creators like Mel Brooks, Larry David, actors like Gene Wilder to a degree, although I think Wilder was more elusive about the topic because he was more of a prolific actor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but other people, even someone like Steven Spielberg, who has supported a lot of Jewish American institutes, including one magazine ironically called Hebe, which he
Mm.
wanted to reclaim that slur, to be used by young and hip people. So he's kind of like reclaiming a slur, kind of like people have reclaimed certain names that were offensive now and they're using it as part of an identity. But
Right.
Levine here, because of his setting and context, he's done it very problematically. Tenenbaum could have been progressive, but she feels wrong in all the wrong places. Dr. Steinman feels like such an anti-Semitic stereotype, like, so a lot of stereotypes are like, oh, they're lawyers or doctors or in these high positions, or they run jewelry shops or bakery shops. There's all these stereotypes. And unfortunately, Dr. Steinman falls into a very weird, disturbing, mad scientist doctor because unfortunately, so mad scientist is kind of a thing that I sort of study, if you will. I've always been intrigued by that trope. Um, and unfortunately, a lot of stereotypical mad scientists would have attributes that could be attributed to anti-Semitism, whether that's in name, location, or being villainized as an unethical experimental type.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. So how about Tenenbaum? Like, what is specifically anti-Semitic about her? Because I think a lot of people don't really understand why. Because on the surface, it just seems like she's not, because there's nothing specifically evil about her. Well, I mean, she was evil to start with in a way, but then she repents.
I think one thing, it's handled in a way that I don't think it would fit Bioshock story structure. I mean, were there people, you know, collaborating with Nazis to do other things against people? Unfortunately, history is complex, and there were individuals who pretty much betrayed their own group, um, and were favored by that party. Um, but for the whole thing of Tenenbaum, it feels very implausible. It feels very much a plot of convenience. And again, she's kind of fitting a problematic stereotype of being like a mad scientist. I guess the only thing that does redeem her is that we later see her as a very loving, kind, motherly type. But then sometimes she's kind of firm and scolding, and then she kind of feels like old lady type, a bit of Yenta, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And her design is a bit Yenta too, right?
It is a bit Yenta. It's a bit. If anything, I feel like it's like I don't know, Fiddler on the Roof met mad scientists, and it feels like that. It does. Like
Right,
there's,
right,
she
right.
could have been handled so much better.
I agree. And it was just a little bit convenient that she ended up in Rapture, because why would she, right? After the tragedy of World War II, what would prompt her to go to Rapture? Wouldn't she just want to live a normal life?
I agree. Like, what would prompt her to accept an offer from Rapture? I mean, I imagine maybe being traumatized by the events of World War II, but still, I can understand why some people would make such a drastic decision if they have seen the world and they think there is no longer anything good. Um, I can see why she's done it, but I think at the same time, someone like Tenenbaum, I feel like she would have either gone to the US or Soviet Union. I mean, that's usually where many of scientists would end up. It's sort of like, um, it's sort of like my dad had this very ridiculous history breakdown. I asked dad about the space race, and he said, well, it's like this. Um, they took all these German scientists, and by German he could also mean German Jewish, and he said we got three of them and the Russians had one. And that's what my dad said while I'm on the space race. You know?
I see. Right.
Yeah.
So moving on from Tenenbaum, how about Sander Cohen? Why is he anti-Semitic?
Oh God. Oh my God. Why does Sander Cohen exist? I mean, sure, you could have some weirdo in your community. I mean, all communities are like a diverse fabric pattern of quilts and things. And you would have Sander Cohen's. Every community has one. You're not a community unless you have a Sander Cohen popping around. But he fits the exact stereotype of the degenerate artist that someone like Goebbels would have ranted about. Like, look at this degenerate artist. He is corrupting our youth, and he's doing these things in these Berlin nightclubs, which, I mean, I guess people always speculate about Berlin nightclubs. I don't know what's special about them, but um so Sander Cohen, he fits the degenerate stereotype. Number one, he is um a caricature of a feminine man. He is a deranged artist that really has no concept of art except art for art's sake. So it's a bit like Oscar Wilde's aestheticism gone wild. And two, he has a very vague, abstract approach to art, and his art is not visually appealing. It's
Hmm.
not. It may be an aesthetic, but it's not aesthetically pleasing. And Sander Cohen, of course, is a demented sadist, and does a lot of terrible things, including things that I feel like that have a deeper dark turning that almost could border on blood libel in a way.
I see. Do you mean like the plaster statues?
I feel like, well, like, I mean, for example, like in symbology, like in symbolism, bathtubs could interpret murder.
Oh, right. Oh, you're
Like
talking.
red
Yes, I
room.
remember the bathtubs
Mhm.
in his
Yeah,
nightclub. Kind of
like red
weird.
room, like
Yeah,
red room, dark web.
yeah.
So like for people who know about the symbols of the dark web, I mean, a bathtub is a very grim thing because that usually entails murder.
Right, exactly. And people committing suicide inside a bathtub, so that's why the water is a different color.
Exactly, exactly. So that, I mean, so what does that mean? Does that mean he's like killing people or forcing them to commit suicide? So it has such a darker intonation. It's not just random furniture. This isn't like Andy Warhol and his soup can.
Right, unfortunately. And finally, what do you think of Andrew Ryan? Like, the whole backstory of him being a Russian Jew and then,
Oh, God.
having his property taken away by the communists and him hating big government to the point of becoming a libertarian and founding Rapture. Do you find Andrew Ryan anti-Semitic?
I don't quite as much, although I want to say history is repeating himself because some people have gone down that path, including an individual with stupid eyebrows, but uh, they were handsome eyebrows. But I am mad at that person. Um, I am mad at them all the time on Twitter. But Ryan is. I don't think he's that anti-Semitic, but then again, he is kind of fitting into a stereotype of people from that ethnic group are viewed as selfish and
Hmm.
materialistic and self-serving, opportunistic, and not compassionate, because these are the main tenets, of you will, of anti-Semitic stereotypes.
That's very true. I think out of the four of them, he's the least stereotypical.
He is. He's the least problematic, the least stereotypical. He also doesn't have, you know, uh, an accent, and his design is not cringeworthy.
Exactly. Yeah. I think Tenenbaum and Sander Cohen are the most cringe design wise, right?
They are the most cringe. Steinman is a little bit, I guess, when we see him behind his surgical mask. Um, not too much, but still, like I said, the mad scientist is kind of problematic because nine chances out of 10, your mad scientist is going to have a German name, and that German name may be interpreted as German Jewish, sadly.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you're very right. And do you think it has to do with, people like Einstein, for example, because of their prominence in science?
I want to say Einstein. I think also other scientists that were not as well known, but were still pretty strong in the circles of like radically pioneering fields that we take for granted today, like advances in chemistry or medical biology, psychology, these fields that or
Freud.
rocket science, yeah, or well, yes, Freud for one, and a few others that would come to mind. um you know Even people, and like I said, unfortunately the mad scientist has always been misaligned in the history books, and sometimes it can be too, like there's a bias too. Like I noticed in my education anyway, that scientists that were from Europe were viewed with more of a darker tone than American, quote unquote, real American scientists.
Mm.
And I noticed that, like, for example, Edison gets praised, but then Tesla gets thrown under the bus, ironically.
Wow. Yeah. I think it's definitely a nationalist bias because, Edison, Benjamin Franklin, all those people are kind of almost seen as, well, I mean, Benjamin Franklin is a founding father. I don't know if Edison is, but they're kind of from the same era and people kind of see them as foundational for America. So that's why it's more positive, right?
Exactly. So Edison's seen as an entrepreneur, a businessman, besides being an inventor and scientist, when really he was just a copywriting hack.
Mm-hmm.
But then someone like Tesla is seen as a weird, scary, eccentric weirdo that nobody liked, which is a terrible libel against Tesla.
Right. And I think also, just to wrap it up, another thing is that people project personality types onto different people. For, someone who's an entrepreneur, to the conservative mind, I've noticed that they think of a person who's entrepreneurial is a red-blooded American guy who is just like us, likes to drink beer and whatever, right? Likes to watch football. Like if he was in modern times, like
Yeah.
when you use certain words, you are tapping into that mindset. But then Tesla is introverted. He has a lot of quirks, like not liking certain shapes, like he doesn't like circles, I think, or something round stuff.
And
So
he was
people
very
think, oh, he's so
attached.
weird. He's
Like he was
so,
very attached to his pet pigeon. Like he was
yeah,
very attached to his
exactly.
pet
So people
pigeon. Yeah.
don't see him as an outgoing, red-blooded, blah blah blah. That is supposedly the epitome of what an American man is supposed to be.
Exactly. And I kind of saw that like in a lot of pulp fiction, a lot of like early science fiction, and a lot of different like media, or even comics from like 20s, 30s up till I want to say the 70s. You see a lot of this mad scientist stereotype in which it's always this person that has a non-American name that's problematic, and it's always the villain and always the weirdo, or the weirdo that becomes your ally but you don't fully trust them because they're so weird.
Also, do you think it's anti-intellectualism? Because when Edison and Benjamin Franklin are intellectual, it's okay because they're red-blooded and also Constitution. But the Constitution rules
No.
over everything. But
That's true. Like,
that period, I'm not just talking about the document, but when American nationalists think about the Constitution, they're thinking about that particular time period that is very unique to them. And then everyone else who doesn't fit into this, oh, they're just someone who's obsessed with knowledge, and they're weird. They're not sociable. They just sit there looking at a book or thinking about stuff that won't affect people's lives.
right. I always hated that. It is a form of anti-intellectualism, and also I think it's libel against people of different personalities and nationalities. Like you know let Tesla be introverted, and don't crap on him because he's Serbian, or whatever have you. I mean, let the man spend $2,000 on his pigeon. I mean, it's a good $2,000. It's his pigeon,
Mm-hmm,
and
right.
yeah, and you know what I mean. I mean, for example, I mean, we'll want to crap on this scientist, but then we let someone like, I don't know, Ben Franklin get away with having a fun time in Paris, having too much fun in Paris.
Well, that's why do you like him? Because he's outgoing.
I'd rather talk to Tesla any day and buy a gift for his pigeon. Like, look at this cute bed I got your pigeon, Nikolai, rather than be 100 feet within Benny F.
Right. All right. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. And I think that's it for our Bioshock discussion. Originally we wanted to talk about Bioshock 1 and 2, but
there's nothing to talk about.
We didn't really enjoy playing them, unfortunately. So that's why we didn't really have anything to say.
There's nothing really to say except it could have been fleshed out better. I feel no sympathy for anyone, and it's repetitive, it's boring, it's dark, it's dank. The Art Deco sucks. I should know this because I love Art Deco. I'm a self-proclaimed Art Deco expert, and there's nothing I can say about Bioshock 1 and 2 except it could have been better.
Yes, and I didn't expect it to be so repetitive. Truth be told, I thought it was going to be very exciting. People were saying it's better than Infinite. So I'm like, yeah, Infinite had a lot of flaws with the racism and the pacing, especially at the end, just felt way too fast. So I thought BioShock 1 and 2 would have better pacing, better characters, more depth and stuff like that. But unfortunately, no.
No, it was the opposite. And more racism.
Thanks, Suchong.
Everyone.
Yeah.
Holloway, Porter, Suchong, everyone is problematic. Honestly, Ken, no. Stop it, Ken, no.
All right, see you.